Hello, today I'm here to chat with Kate, author, teacher, compost queen, who's based in Sydney with her husband and her three young kids. Most of you will know Kate as Compostable Kate on Instagram. I first heard about Kate via Insta, but we hadn't crossed paths until she started shooting her book. At the time, Kate was living in the Bega Valley, and her cousin Sierra and her photographer Nat Medham had both put my name forward to photograph Kate's book. She messaged me and then we met up and we hit it off instantly. We've both got that same crazy high energy vibe and enthusiasm for whatever we do. Kate and I went from not knowing each other to working pretty intensely together for 2 weeks straight over very long days and trying to get everything shot for the book. We also had kids at the same school, so we were juggling school runs in between and the crazy stuff that life brings you. It was a real gift to be involved with Kate's book. For me, it was like a real merging of my personal interests and work. It was like a dream job and I gained a new friend from it too. So yeah, Kate, welcome.
Thank you, honey. It's lovely carving out a little bit of time to chat to you because now that I've moved away from the Bega Valley, we're doing so much phone tagging and, it's hard to carve out that time. So it's great to have some time to catch up and talk about all the things that we've achieved and all the stuff that we've still got ahead as well.
Yes, so much. Always scheming, aren't we?
Yeah. I know. We need to get better at scheming and bringing stuff to fruition though, because I think often my head has all of these ideas, but then the reality of having 3 small children sometimes brings things to a grinding halt. But yeah, it's really great having you as a creative collaborator and a motivator as well. I'm really impressed by all of the different things that you do and find it super inspiring having you as someone that I can bounce ideas off. So yeah, it's cool to be here.
Likewise. So I've got Kate on today to really just have a chat about, I think, a lot of people who maybe love the idea of creating a book and kind of like to figure out how that would happen. So kind of just like the process that you went through from, composting to having a social media account and then how that kind of merged into a book that I think for a lot of people, they're like, wow, that's just, and there's so many steps along the way to make it happen. But it seems, something that people dream about and probably will never do, but a small percentage of people will. And it's like figuring out what that magic is and I guess helping other people figure out how to make it work as well is kind of the main reason I've got you on.
Yeah.
So much to give.
Well, it was a really interesting process for me. And I think the first element probably of my success using Instagram and then subsequently TikTok was thinking about it as an education platform. So I always had a really clear idea about why I was using it. And that probably stems from me being a teacher. So I thought, gosh, it's amazing, that we're all on our phones and we can be absorbing, all different messages from different people. And I wanted to have my voice on the platform to be one of inspiration and education. It sounds a bit cheesy, but that was really, my purpose around it. When I first signed up to Instagram, it was a new platform for me. Lots of my girlfriends had been on it for years, but being a high school teacher, unfortunately, so many of the bullying problems that I dealt with, I was a year coordinator, came from social media. So I personally didn't have an account. But then when we were living in the inner west at the time, there was a group of very cool old ladies who were all on Instagram and were surprised to hear that I wasn't because they followed gardeners. They followed one particular account called the Plant Street Library, a lady in Annandale, and she would post about when she had cuttings to share. And at that stage, I had a really big shared street garden. So I had lots of edibles and herbs and cut and come again veggies that me and the neighbours shared. And they said, oh, you have to sign up so you can get some more free plants. And that was an interesting revelation to me because I really hadn't realised that people used social media in that way. I just thought it was all about, taking a pouty selfie as a teenager.
Yes.
And I think, like you, honey, when I think about doing something and when I, really put my mind to a new project, I go all in. So I started reading some articles about garden accounts, and one of my favourite garden writers, Alice Fowler, she writes for The Guardian, she had an article, this was, 5 years ago, about her favourite gardening Instagrams. And one of them was this lady, Hannah. She calls herself the Worm Monger. And I thought, wow, it's amazing that, she's got this whole platform teaching people how to worm farm. She was a real inspiration about me starting my Instagram. Initially, though, I was sharing about the street garden and compost inadvertently was something that I would always come back to, because I'd try to buy as few amounts of bagged potting mix. I would be making my own from my own soil mixes and compost and worm castings. And so that sort of crept into my content. It's something that I had always been really passionate about, but hadn't realised that equally people would be as interested in it. I think it also was a bit of the confluence of COVID and everyone being stuck at home and people turning inward and then starting to think about their garden as a form of self-expression and relaxation and environmental activism as well. So I think my content really resonated then. So my account slowly grew, but when I first started my account, it was called the Grove Street Gardener. That's where we were living at the time. And then when we moved to the Bega Valley, I just really knuckled down on making compost content, because I thought, if we're all stuck at home, then at least we can be making a good impact on the planet. So I changed it to Compostable Kate, which I thought had a good ring. And from there, that's where Murdoch Books, my publisher, then found me. So I was in a really highly fortunate position to have a publisher seek me out. Whereas I know, talking to people who are trying to get a book deal, that often the more usual path is you may get a literary agent, or equally you might try and do it yourself, and you write something called first pages, which is like a small section of your book idea, and then you present that to different publishing houses. Whereas the Murdoch Books team sent me a DM saying, have you ever thought about writing a compost book? And I immediately said yes, which, you sort of think about these things, but it didn't really feel like a reality until I got that message. And from there, that's how I started working through the process of signing the book deal and writing the book. But in terms of people thinking about dipping your toe in the publishing world, always think about how precious some of the real estate is on social media. So with my captions, even still now to this day, I usually write as much as I possibly can. So people often write really short captions, but I'd try and include as much detailed information there. And I would equally in my videos, a lot of them, like some of my old videos, really ridiculous lip syncing ones, but I wouldn't feel afraid of using humour to educate as well. And from that, my publisher Jane could see that I could write and could see that I could communicate an idea that resonated. And yeah, it was interesting, the process of negotiating for my book, because I really knew what I wanted to say, and it was a lot of information. So they were expecting me to write about 30,000 words, and my manuscript my unedited manuscript was 90,000 words. And then it was a back and forth process of editing it down to about 70,000 words. But always in my head as well, I knew that I wanted it to be a highly visual book, because I find the process of composting so beautiful. It's this act of transformation where, you've got waste that really gets totally transformed and turns into garden gold. So I wanted to capture that beauty of decay and renewal. And so I knew I wanted to work with a passionate photographer. And then a couple of people, as you said, Nat and Sierra, sent you my way. So I truly do think that your photos bring the book to life. So we really ended up being the dream team for the book. So that was a really exciting thing as well.
We did, yeah. It was an incredible process, that being able to have the chance to photograph, again, similarly, like I wasn't necessarily obsessed with compost, but just obsessed with the earth. And then the beauty in decay, the beauty in everything. As a photographer, you see beauty in not just a sunset, and having the chance to actually stretch my muscles and to be able to photograph something that most people would be like, oh, that's just like rotting food, but to be able to photograph it in a way that was beautiful was really exciting. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was different to how I normally shoot. So yeah, it was fun, the process.
It was a really interesting process, and it was, I think that you understood the brief from day one, which made it so much easier. And as you said, we got on like a house on fire. So I think for people interested in getting in this area, connecting with creatives is a really awesome place to start. My sister-in-law is a really interesting academic. She writes about matcha. So she's a matcha historian, and, it's interesting with all of this interest in matcha that's now blown up. And she has written academic books, but she would like to write more informal commercial book. And it was just using her as an example for other people. So she is a published author, but to break into the publishing industry has been an interesting process for her, because she went the usual way, put together first pages and, a blurb of what her book would be about. But she so far hasn't got interest from publishers, commercial publishers yet, because she doesn't have a platform. So I think as much as it's a frustrating thing, and, I've spent hundreds of hours on creating content, but I can see that it becomes like your visual CV. It shows how you can write, it shows how you can communicate. And also you have an inbuilt audience who then are ready to buy from you as well.
Yes.
And that really is something that, with the current climate in publishing, it's especially, the cost of living has increased so significantly that people don't have spare cash. Probably like they did during COVID, there was a huge publishing boom, and now it's really cooled off. So having that inbuilt audience means that publishers, it lessens the risk for them.
Yeah, so they're looking for low risk things and having having runs on the board with social media or some type of following just shows that yes, the market for what you do is warm. So
yes,
let's start a discussion rather than a cold. Yeah,
that's right. And so I think also probably other advice that I could share is, for me, it was very easy to, using the social media lingo of niching down, because talking about compost was the thing that I'm most interested in, even now as a gardener. I love plants, but I truly am much more interested in decomposing stuff than growing stuff. And so I was able to narrow my focus, and I could see pretty quickly from my account that that's what people were interested to learn from. But I think that is a useful thing. So not talking about too much, because social media was Instagram was a new platform for me. Read lots of, articles and tips about how to go about making content and how to go about presenting yourself online, because I wanted to get it right. I didn't want to waste my time. So thinking about those like keywords in your name. With mine, I've filled it up with as many keywords that are relevant to me. I think those things do make a difference. And also, it's been an interesting thing about the way that my content has evolved. So I now really love making videos with other people who are in the same space. So whether it's about regenerative gardening or whether it's a home gardener who's starting up a composting system for the first time. But I think those collaborations that you can do with like-minded people also is really useful, because then that broadens your reach to their audience as well, and likewise them to your audience. But I think all of that helped me grow.
How did you kind of navigate those, like those collaborations? Like, so obviously you get asked sometimes you might be inspired to ask someone, like, how do you kind of feel out that it's a good fit, a good fit for you?
I think for me, I have just asked people that have followed me, and there's been a few instances where I've been, I quite regularly get asked by companies and stuff to make videos with them, and I've always said no. Because I feel very comfortable selling myself and selling my knowledge, but I don't feel particularly comfortable selling stuff. Whereas working with other gardening accounts, where we are just sharing knowledge and sharing advice and our experiences, I feel like that works with me ethically. But I also just think, as you well know, I'm quite shameless with these things, and rejection doesn't bother me, so I just if there's someone's video that I think, oh wow, that's such a cool idea, even if they don't follow me, if I think that would really resonate well with my audience, then I'll go over and send them a message and, start the process from there. But I think, just knowing that, I think it's been helpful, because I feel like Compostable Kate is like my alter ego. So,
yes.
She lives online, whereas I live in the real world. So there's that separation.
Yes, yeah. And I also think that like you are different to a lot of people, like especially to me. Like I would send something out and then like think about the fact that the person hadn't messaged me back, So it's
yes.
I think what people, who are listening need to understand is that this is actually you. Like in real life, you're like, you're an extrovert, you love people, and you're like, cool, give it a go. If it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's totally right. But I think I feel like people can learn from that and just know that, you know, this sort of stuff isn't that serious, like as much
No,
as my messaging is, but you
Yes.
know, it's, and of course there's going to be people that will say no because they're not interested in your content or they're not interested
Yes.
in collaborating at that current time because they've got too much on their plate. But I think putting yourself out there is really great.
Yeah.
And in terms of selling my books, so I went through quite an intense period of doing lots of videos and making lots of content because being a first-time author and being really passionate with what I had produced, you know, I've written a really excellent book and I can totally back myself on that, but I wanted to make sure that as many people could read it as possible. During that promotional period, I made a lot of content and I was on lots of really cool podcasts, and I didn't do very much in-person. I did hardly any in-person events actually for a number of reasons. So living in the Bega Valley with my partner, often being up in Sydney, that sort of inhibited what I was able to do. But equally, it was interesting. So the publishing industry has costs have increased for them so significantly, partly because of climate change. So the cost of paper now is so much more than it was 10 years ago. So for first-time authors like me, they weren't prepared to bankroll a book tour because that's a costly exercise. So I did have to rely on my voice. So whether it was on radio, ABC has been really generous with me being a compost and gardening expert. So I'd often be on the radio, on local and national radio. I did some TV stuff, which is interesting as well with TV because you sort of start realizing that everyone is just out to make content. And, you know, if you can communicate clearly online, then you'll be able to communicate pretty clearly in different formats too.
Yes.
So I lent into that, but I know that you're wanting to talk about burnout, which is definitely something. Once I was able to say my book was a bestseller, initially the sales was solid, but they weren't huge. And Honey and I would often be talking about, you know, Honey is very data driven as well as creative. But, you know, I remember a conversation with you where you're saying, can't they say, you know, you did that reel and then this many people clicked through, and I talked to my publisher about that and she laughed and she's like, publishing is so old school and the data is so slow. But yeah, my book initially, it took a little bit of time to gain momentum, and independent bookstores were a big part of its success. So whenever I promote my book, I always first of all talk about, now at this point, borrow it from a library to really lean into the circular economy, and then secondly, buy it from an independent bookshop. And then finally, thirdly, you know, it is online. But I don't want my dollars and the consumers' dollars going to places like Amazon. So, yeah, really giving support behind the Australian independent book industry, I think, is important too. But after doing that big social media and traditional media push, once I was able to say my book was a bestseller, which is a huge achievement, I really needed to go cold turkey with social media. So I definitely took at least a year off. So it was where I did nothing. So I've got a TikTok account and an Instagram account, and I was totally done. You know, I'd given everything that I wanted to give, and probably more than that at points as well.
Yes.
And I think that was an interesting experience for me because I needed to take that time off. And it's also a really good thing for people who have their own businesses who are using Instagram as a platform for sales, to know that you can take that time off. And
I think that's something I really wanted to centre in on that, because I feel like that's what I hear all the time, because I photograph women in business, is that
yes,
feeling that they can never stop. Like if they have a week off, then they're going to get penalised, and then
and you do get a bit. So I genuinely took about a year off and didn't do anything, didn't do any stories, didn't make any videos, nothing. So you'll see if you're interested, there'll be stuff, you know, actively posting, and then you'll see a big time off. So all of last year, I basically didn't do anything. And now I have re-engaged my audience because I feel invigorated and I feel like I've got something new to say as well. You know, I got to the point where I was like, I've made all the videos that I wanted to say. My book says everything I want to say. You know, I can't keep on rehashing the same information. You know, that's not serving my audience. It's not serving myself. You do get penalised for doing that, but not indefinitely. So I found after taking that significant time off, the videos and the posts that I started sharing had a really small reach. So my account now is quite large. So I'm used to having my videos initially be served to my audience, and then they tend to break out and new eyeballs and new people who are interested in composting get to see them. That didn't happen when I first started reposting. And that's, you know, the algorithm giving you a smack on the wrist saying, naughty, naughty girl for taking a year off. But then it came back, you know, and I think if you know what your messaging is, and if you then, once you've taken that time off, if you put the work back in then, and you're making content that resonates with people, then it's totally fine. And I know that, you know, Instagram and TikTok want every single second of our attention, and they want small business owners to feel like they cannot switch off at any time. And I think that's just such an unhealthy mindset to have. And, you know, if you're putting so much online, then, you know, maybe you're letting lots of other elements of your life be put on the back burner. And that's not the right balance either.
Yes. Yeah. Have you found any other avenues, like outside of social media, just in that time off where, you know, actually human connection, chatting to people, you know, like have you noticed kind of just any things that have like been organic that have happened?
Yeah, look, councils are somewhat a big part of my work. I've worked for lots of different councils in New South Wales, and also just now that I'm in Sydney, I've met so many fantastic people who I've really been inspired by in person. And, you know, I think that's been just, real life is so much more interesting than what happens online. And, you know, what I'm filming is about real life when, you know, I'm making compost content, but it is still edited. You know, I never show my kids online. And, I now as well, because we've moved and I've got my systems all slowly starting to be set up. Thankfully, Bokashi is something that's very easy to bring in a rental. But I have been showing, you know, a real edited version of what happens in my life. And that to me actually is really protective. And it's been really helpful doing that, because I think if you give too much online and don't actually operate in the real world, then all of those real world connections, if that gets lost, that's when I think burnout happens far more quickly as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's been an interesting process. I've always thought about Instagram, the fact that it's rented space, and you know, I need to be a big girl and create a website and do all of that. And it's just finding the time to do that. Even with that year off, I was really so exhausted from doing any online creation. I didn't have the energy to do that. But that's what I'm wanting to channel time and effort into now. So stuff that I own. So the fact that you know, Instagram is there as a promotional platform and as an education platform is great. But I think focusing on platforms that you own is yes. really significant too. And also just feeling like, I think it's easy for me when like what I'm putting online is not I've sometimes I post in my book quite regularly, but I'm not really selling my product online, whereas small businesses who are doing that, it's hard to get that organic engagement when you don't have a message beyond that. So I feel like I'm lucky in a way that for me, because I am a teacher, you know, I'm teaching about people about compost, and that's something that is, you know, that there's such a hunger for it. But I can see that if you're a small business owner trying to sell stuff, feeling like you can't take time off, you could feel that pressure. But I really think it's healthy to take stock and to not feel like you need to be posting all the time, especially if you end up not posting, you know, stuff that is interesting or engaging, but you just feel like you have to rehash
I agree. And
stuff all the time.
I think in the end, like from my experience, when you are doing it because you feel like you have to,
yes,
without a sense of energy and enthusiasm for what you're doing, then the algorithm and like it shows. It's like
yes,
pretending that you're like, I'm fine.
Yeah,
no, like
yeah.
I think that people can sense that, and then you're getting less results. You're putting in more energy, forced energy, and
yes,
not getting any results for it, and that just makes you feel even worse because it's
yeah,
like,
totally,
yeah. It's
I think
that feeling of being a failure.
Yes, I think knowing why you're doing it, and you know, for me, I suffer from really bad climate anxiety, and it feels really good when I get messages from middle American housewives saying, "Oh, you've made composting so cool," and you know, I've gone to the big box store and I've got myself a compost bin and I've started composting, and my husband thinks I'm mad, but I'm obsessed with it. And you know, for me, they're the moments where I'm like, I can see the impact that I'm making, and that really motivates me to keep on educating people.
Yeah.
But I think now, especially, that diversity, not just putting all of your eggs in one basket, is really important. And being kind to yourself, because I think if you do one interesting, engaging post a week, honestly, I feel like that is plenty. You know, I think I've seen, it was interesting as well with my platform. So my publisher, I signed my book deal when I had about 18,000 followers.
Actually, that was my next question, was to say, to come back to that beginning question, which was like, where were you, so people have an understanding of where you're at. So like you had the Grove Street one, and then you changed your name and you're being a bit more strategic about, what was the time period that went by from like, I'm just going to share some cuttings and stuff in my garden, to like being more strategic, and then that's happening? Like, what sort of time period do you think that was?
I think that I had Sunday, my daughter was very newborn baby I'm trying to think back when I first started the account, and I didn't have very much time at all. But I enjoyed the fact that I could share these images of the street garden. And I also enjoyed the fact that I was using, even back then, the captions that I wrote, I felt like they were like little exercises for my brain about writing, some interesting, engaging captions that you captured what I was doing. But, like everyone else who starts a new Instagram account, I had a tiny following. It always surprised me when I got new followers, because I was sort of like, why? Like, I couldn't quite work it out. But I think because I was showing something a bit different. The street garden that I had was really epic. It went all the way around the corner. Lots of neighbours ended up being involved. But, that's once again a real life experience that becomes an interesting thing online. And then when I started posting about how I was feeding those pots and, my different worm farms and compost bins that I had in a very, very tiny little terrace, I could see that people were interested in that. And that was the content that took off. But it wasn't like I went from, 100 followers to 100,000, within a short period. I think I can't really remember so I signed up in September of 2020, and I signed my book deal at some point in 2022. And I know in those 2 years, I went from 0 to like about 18,000 followers was what I was at when I signed the book deal. And then beyond that, it's grown over the years. But I can see that there's particular, there's some videos that I've made. I've gained 20,000 followers off one video.
Wow, that blows my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, unfortunately, as well, is like that kind of gambling sort of mindset where, if I just put that dollar in, then that's going to, make my fortune. And I found that I think I've been pretty good at separating myself from those numbers, because it's quite a new medium for me. And also because I'm a teacher and but actually during all of this time I was a stay-at-home mum. I had 3 very small children, so I wasn't feeling like every follower was how I was making my money. So I just was like, oh, this is curious that I've got all of these followers. Like, it was a surprising thing, and I think by having that more relaxed attitude freed me up from the content that I was making. I was making really ridiculous content. Like, when I first started making videos, I'd never filmed myself and I'd never talked to the camera. I'd never, ever done stuff like this before, which I think meant, and I also know it's part of my personality, I don't have a strong experience of shame, which is useful when you're online. But I also just didn't think about the people that followed me. Because I only follow Oz Harvest, an amazing food bank charity here in Australia. And I'd only ever followed, a small amount of accounts. Now I just follow them, partly because I don't want to think about who's following me, and I don't want to think about, old friends from high school, or, parents from my kids' school following me, because then that can inhibit what you're doing. I just wanted, if I had something that I found funny or I found educational or interesting, I would just put my blinkers on and share that. And I think that was another way how my account organically grew.
That's
But
good
I am,
advice about
sorry.
that's good about that kind of separation, because I think it's
Yeah.
something that I hear as a common anxiety that people have.
Yes.
That the you obviously sometimes your work persona is maybe a bit more G'd up than
Yeah.
what people see at home, like your brother or your sister, and so people feel like that when they share that person's watching them, and so it kind of like inhibits the things that they want to say and how they want to express themselves. So I think
Totally.
it's good to be like, yeah, blinkers on.
Yeah, I think because so many people do it nowadays. Like our kids have moved schools, so I've got this whole new group of mums who are quite curiously looking at my videos, and I'm like, oh, don't scroll back too far. You're going to see some really bad lip syncing ones, But equally, I'm not ashamed of that, because I really, for me, I if it's humour that gets someone to compost, or if it's some scientific facts that get someone to compost, I don't care what it is that I'm doing. I just want to see that real life impact of people actually embracing scraps and returning those scraps to the soil. And so I think because my feeling about what the impact that I'm wanting to have is what drives me, I take away my feeling of shame or embarrassment about these things. I think it's easier for me in that way, because I'm using it to educate people and to get people composting.
Yes. Yeah, I guess it's also I feel like that there's still a key that people can use, like a thread for like business owners and stuff, when you're thinking about like you've got this thing where you're not actually selling something all the time. You're incredibly passionate about it. I think it's, for me, and it's something that I talk about often, is that people should share a little bit of the other things that are in their life that excite them and light them up. Get excited about, because even though it may not be directly related to the thing that they sell,
yes,
it is the thing that makes them human, more likely for someone to buy from them, rather than like if there's two people selling, candles, like why would you buy from that person, or that person? Because maybe you saw that they also like this, and this, that they're excited.
Yes.
Yeah. So I feel like it's just, even if they don't have the same type of thing that they're, like the greater good type thing that you're doing, there's having something in like a thread of what you do in your personal life that really excites you.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that going back to human connection in real life, but that human connection that can happen online, I think absolutely is important for small businesses. And that now you and I, plus a number of really other inspiring people in this environmental advocacy and education space, have a cool WhatsApp group that connects us together. So, and it's so commonplace, all of these feelings. So even people who have that kind of bigger picture and bigger drive, for you to give your hours online, you need to have that some sort of monetary return. And talking about how you can work through the ethics of that, and how you can show enough of yourself whilst also protecting your home life, or whatever it is that you're wanting to keep separated, is something that I think it is different for each person. And it's been interesting talking to these other group of really awesome women and seeing how they're navigating that.
I agree. I think it's like making sure whatever you do online, having a group of people that maybe aren't necessarily in your friendship circle. Because sometimes your friends or your partner, you try and share things with them and they just don't understand. They don't understand the parameters of how the space works for work, for business, the ethics that are involved. And so having a group of like-minded creatives, or whatever it is industry that you work in, that kind of get it.
Yes.
And being able to share stuff and then bounce ideas and go, oh, that person, thought of, a way to make money still, but also be ethical. And you're always igniting each other and helping each other along. I think it's a great thing to have.
Yes, I think so, definitely. And whether, maybe you don't have those connections initially, but looking at other accounts and how they do things, even if it's totally different to your small business, I think if they align with you in terms of your values, then, even just watching how other people do things, I think is really interesting, and you can learn a lot from that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's been a couple of years since the book came out.
Yes.
What sort of stayed with you from that experience, and what do you think is next?
Another book. My publisher for the last few years has been keen for me to write another book, and I was like, I don't have anything else to say. You're expecting 30,000 words. I gave you 90,000 words. This is this is everything I could possibly want to say about it. And in a way that, felt great, because I wanted to create a book that answered everyone's questions and, became a reference book that you could refer back to all the time. And it's not just for beginner composters. The last chapter, which is almost my favorite chapter, called The Soil, goes into all of these other regenerative practices that people could do. But I did feel like the idea of writing another book, I was like, well, I don't have anything else to say. But now I've been starting to talk to them about what book number 2 could be, and I've been starting to talk to you as well honey, about what it could be. And I feel excited about that process. And then aside from this, I've gone back to the classroom. So now that I've got 3 kids, my youngest is in little kindy. She goes to a Steiner school, so she's not at kindergarten full time. But by her being there 3 days a week, it's allowed me to return to the classroom. And that's been so fantastic, because for me, my passion for compost education came from teaching, because I'm a food tech teacher, which is like a home ec cooking teacher, and teaching young people how to cook. But then at the end of every lesson, putting all of the food scraps in the bin felt so deeply backwards and wrong and crazy. That was a big part of me thinking, composting needs to be accessible and it needs to be something at the forefront of people's minds. So now going back into the classroom, I'm teaching at my kids' Steiner school here in Sydney and teaching food tech. There's an agriculture part of it as well. So teaching kids to compost has been really great. I've only just started this term. So that's another part of my real life work that feels really impactful and really joyful as well.
We've always spoken about it. I feel like that a kid's version is definitely
yes,
like really.
But that's also the interesting thing about the publishing industry. That was the book that I felt like pretty quickly I was like, oh well, I could do a kid's version of this and that. And my publisher was not interested at all. They're like, nah, Costa's got kids' books coming out. We can't compete with him. Nah, not going to do it. And so I have got lots of no's as well as getting some big yeses, and just going, okay, well that's that's fine, and moving on to the next idea. I think is getting that resilience about this, because especially with publishing, they're looking at the big picture. And they're looking at selling these books. And so they look at all of this other data that you're just not aware of.
We're just going, oh, that sounds like a fun thing to do. Yeah. You kids teach kids as the next generation.
Totally, yeah.
No data to back it up, but, sounds like fun.
But it has been lovely actually seeing how other teachers have been using my book. And I know that my book is at a lot of schools. So that's fantastic. Even though there's some saucy, worm sex sections in it that maybe are not so good for kids, it's been really cool to see that have its the impact there. And then for me as well, in terms of what I'm wanting to lean into is in-person workshops. So I've done lots and lots of online workshops for councils, but I am wanting to really get in-person workshops happening here in Sydney, because that's, you can learn a lot from watching videos, but actually seeing someone do these processes in person, I think is a huge thing. I've been running a few with the City of Sydney, but I am wanting to back myself to run them independently. So that's something new for me. And Alex, who is the founder of Cornersmith, the really lovely pickling Inner West cafe, she's written quite a few books as well. She has been helping me with that because she's been a online and in-person educator for a really long time. And that's something that I've just really loved, the generosity of people in this space sharing information that is so, you can't, all of this stuff, it's such a new career, this online stuff, and being a influencer, as I call myself, I have no sense of what to charge for things, especially because I would be doing all of this for free if it actually made people compost as well. So I think that's been something that I've been so impressed by. If you ask people these questions and you're in the same sort of wheelhouse, people have just been so generous with sharing their knowledge and their experience. So that's been a really supportive, excellent part of me taking the next step in working out how I can take my knowledge and skills to new areas.
That's fantastic. I think it's just a mirror of your energy. I think because you're so giving and energetic in that way, and you're so open to just telling anyone in the street something about compost. I feel like that's just a mirror of you. That's why I think that happens. So I think
yeah, I think there's truth to that. And, you know, equally with me having to take that year off, you know, that was sort of that turning inward, and not like I was not interested in engaging with people in that way. And that's also because, you know, if you're giving too much online, then there has to be that point where things stop. And so it is lovely being back. You know, I think that's reflective of the composting process. I myself was going through that decay cycle, and now I'm going through that renewal cycle. And that's totally human as well. So I think giving yourself grace to collapse in a heap and then to regrow from that, I think is something that is quite universal. So it's nice to be in this phase now.
Oh, it's perfect. It's a perfect way to end. Thank you, Kate, for your time and your energy. It's so good. Yeah, I agree. Having that time and space, none of us allow it enough in our lives to reflect on things. It's always go, go, go. So, yeah, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, honey.
So you can follow along with Kate via her Instagram, and I'll include that in the show notes. And with buying her book, even though I shot it and she's my friend, I can't recommend it enough. It's absolutely incredible. So yeah, check it out at your local bookshop or your local library.
Thanks, honey.
Yeah, thank you so much. We'll see you soon in Sydney.
See you soon. Yeah.